The definition for a reference angle: let theta be a non-acute angle in standard position that lies in a quadrant. Its reference angle is the positive acute angle, theta prime, formed by the terminal side of theta and the x-axis. Okay, so we have three cases here where your angle, if it is non-acute, so greater than 90, if it lies in the second quadrant, or it could lie in the third quadrant or the fourth quadrant. Okay, if we have an angle that's in the second quadrant, so this is angle theta, its reference angle is the positive acute angle that's formed by the terminal side and the x-axis. So if you have an angle that's in the second quadrant, if you want to find its reference angle, then you subtract that angle from 180 degrees. Okay, if your angle is in radian measure, then instead of 180 degrees, you would subtract from pi, which is the equivalent. Okay, if you have an angle, theta, that's in the third quadrant, between 180 degrees and 270 degrees, then to find the reference angle, this acute angle that's formed by the terminal side and the x-axis, then you would subtract 180 degrees from your angle measure, and that gives you a reference angle. Okay, and then also, if it's in radians, then you would subtract pi from your angle measure, from theta. Okay, then our third case here is, what if your angle, theta, is in the fourth quadrant? So if I wanted to find the measure of this acute angle, I would subtract the angle from 360 degrees, or if my angle is in radians, I would subtract it from 2 pi. So the first types of problems you're going to have with this will be just like example 5. It's going to say find the reference angle for each of the following angles. So in part A, we started out with angle theta equal to 160 degrees. So I know that 160 degrees is in the second quadrant. So if my angle is in the second quadrant, I'm going to subtract its measure from 180 degrees, and so that gives me a reference angle that's equal to 20 degrees. Okay, if I look at part B, I have an angle theta that's 345 degrees, so that's in quadrant 4, which tells me I would subtract this angle from 360 degrees, so that my reference angle would equal 360 minus 345, so the reference angle would be 15 degrees. Okay, then part C, we have an angle that's in radians. 5 pi over 6 is in the second quadrant, so I would find my reference angle by subtracting the angle from pi. Okay, if we go back, remember, if we're in the second quadrant, we're subtracting the angle from 180 or from pi. So I would have pi minus 5 pi over 6. Okay, well, if I'm going to subtract that, I have to get a common denominator. So I would have 6 pi over 6 minus 5 pi over 6. So that would be 1 pi over 6. So that would be my reference angle. Okay, on D, we actually have a negative angle, negative 135 degrees. So if you have an angle that is negative, what you're going to have to do first is find a coterminal angle. Okay, this is something that we've also talked about in our previous sections. A coterminal angle, I can find it by adding 360 degrees to this angle measure. So I'm going to take negative 135 and I'm going to add 360 degrees. So that gives me a positive angle, coterminal, which is 225 degrees. So now I can tell which quadrant 225 degrees would be in. Okay, so that would be in the third quadrant. This is my coterminal angle that I'm going to use. If I think about, that's in the third quadrant here. So my reference angle, I would have to subtract 180 from the 225. Okay, so then my reference angle would be 45 degrees. Okay, so this statement that I have underneath this is really related to Part D and the last two questions. It says if you have an angle that's greater than 360 degrees or 2 pi or less than, then you must find a positive angle that's less than 360 degrees or 2 pi that's coterminal with the given angle. So like on E, this is greater than 360 degrees, so first I have to find a coterminal angle. So the first thing I would do is subtract 360. So that gives me a coterminal angle of 220 degrees, and then I work from this angle to find my reference angle. So 220 is again in the third quadrant, so I would subtract 180 from 220, and so that gives me my reference angle of 40 degrees. Okay, then if I look at F, we have 8 pi over 3. Okay, again, that's greater than 2 pi, so I would subtract 2 pi, have to get a common denominator, so that would give me 8 pi over 3 minus 6 pi over 3, if I multiply everything by 3 here, and so now I can subtract, and I get 2 pi over 3. Okay, this is just a coterminal angle. So now, to find my reference angle, I know that 2 pi over 3 is in the second quadrant. So if it's in the second quadrant, I'm going to subtract it from pi. So again, common denominator would make this be 3 pi over 3 minus 2 pi over 3. So my reference angle is just pi over 3.